and welcome to the very special edition of the Wealth Management Show. So, for those of you who have been aware through this live stream, you'll be able to chat, interact with active professionals in the wealth management and related fields, leveraging decades of experience combined in these specific topics. So, the main goal is to provide a casual, interactive space where we'll provide commentary, insight into these sorts of topics, answer your questions here live. For any that you have, please, you're highly encouraged. This is an interactive stream. Come on in and ask anything you'd like. The goal here is so that you guys start to look at these topics a bit more like the professionals do. And that's going to do two things. It's going to elevate your knowledge, and that's going to lead to secondary benefits like allowing you to better tell if you're getting well served, allow you to take on more services, more possibilities within your wealth plan that you might have been oblivious to before, and all the benefits that come with that, like the enhanced security, that confidence that you're going to reach your goals. There's many elements to these things, and once you understand them better, you're much better suited to find those right professionals that you could rely on and live your life more freely with less worry. So leading to better results for you and your family. So we're here for you. Please use this as a resource. Take advantage today that we have our asset protection specialist on board. I'm going to introduce him here in a quick moment. That's why we do this, basically these live streams, to make ourselves available. And as many of you know, this live stream has been growing and it's expanding. It's going to be now going forward a bit more of a wealth management in a more general sense, more holistic sense point of view. You guys have heard me talk very much about integration and things like asset protection or estate planning or tax planning, right? But now you're going to get a view into this live about how do we interact with each other? How does a wealth manager talk with a asset protection specialist behind the scenes? And where's my head at when I'm wondering, how do these things fit into the wealth plan to better, more certainly reach high net worth individuals' goals? And you're going to get a taste of that today. So I'll start with just a bit of background of myself for anybody who's not aware. I'm a co-founder of an investments firm named Rushlight Investments, where I act as wealth manager. What my job is as a wealth manager is to keep that 30,000 foot view in sight at all times as we progress with the client. So things happen, and their retirement goals, their philanthropic goals, their preparing and giving to the next generation goals, and the mix of all these things. Asset protection, estates, all these things have different implications and different stages where they shine at different levels, right? So keeping an eye on that so that everything's functioning properly for that goal is my job. And let me switch screens over here as I introduce our guest for the day. Ron Iacone, who is a shareholder of Iacone Law, specializing in asset protection with a focus on high net worth individuals, is exactly why we have him here today. So to talk to you guys about these things. And this is going to give you another great example through his expertise of this is one of the key relationships that comes into play when we're talking wealth management plans and wealth management, the asset protection side of the equation. So hopefully we could shed some light on this for you guys today. And as for the agenda, today is just going to be an open discussion. So any questions, again, you're encouraged, put them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on the comment section. If anybody's watching on through a shared party or a watch party or a shared post, I don't see those comments on my feed. So come on over to my personal page. Put your comments in below the actual live stream going on my timeline, and I'll be able to see them right away. And with that being said, like, share, tag a friend who you think this would be appropriate for. Business owners, people in risky positions where there's a high probability of lawsuits, or sort of key people who if you know somebody like that, tell them to come over. There's going to be great information for them here today. And so yeah, with that being said, let's dive right into it. And so Ron, how you doing? Let me unmute you here, and let me lower some of this music so we can better hear you. I hope you're
Okay.
doing well.
Doing well. Am I live?
Yeah, we're live. We're live. I hear you. Got you loud and clear.
Perfect.
So
Well, I'm looking
yeah,
forward to this for sure. And I'm glad it's more of the almost like not so much a presentation, but more of a conversation. So I'm looking forward to interacting with any guests. And please, if there's questions, just as JP said, just send them to him and we'll get the ball rolling that way. But JP, I just want to thank you for such a gracious introduction. And of course, I relish this opportunity to be a guest on your show. And I look forward to sharing what I've learned over the years in this area, which is asset protection. And I've always seen from my experience in the topic is what is asset protection? People seem to not know what it is, and a lot of times other advisors don't know what it is. So I think I want to start out by defining it for you. And there's many definitions of it. There's asset protection. There's wealth preservation. I've even heard it called premarital or pre-litigation type planning. But really, as far as the essence of it goes, what is it? And in our practice, it involves the implementation of certain techniques and strategies in order to place your assets beyond the reach of any future and potential creditors. Now, when I say place your assets beyond their reach, what do I mean by that? I mean, it could be the physical sense. We literally take the asset and we move it somewhere else. And then it can't be attached or levied on by your creditor or what ends up being another attorney. Or it could also mean in the metaphorical sense, right? The asset stays where it is, but we're going to change title. We're going to change the ownership. So there's different degrees of what asset protection is, but ultimately what we want to do in conjunction with my clients' advisors and using an approach aimed at collaboration and integration is to arrange financial affairs, my clients' financial affairs in ways that emphasize risk management, okay? And we do preventative planning because what's the goal with asset protection or wealth preservation? What we want to do is discourage lawsuits. We want to isolate risk, absolutely limit liability, which is important, and promote settlement. You know, if you're sued, it's best to focus your efforts and get back to making money. You don't want to be bogged down paying lawyers and defending yourself. So what asset protection can do is accomplish that for you. Perhaps if you're even named in a lawsuit, you can settle, and you can settle on your terms, okay? So in essence, we want to separate using these techniques and strategies, your assets from your liabilities, okay? And to do that correctly with asset protection planning, it involves the mastery of optics, right? And we want to do asset protection in a way that judges are going to respect. So let's say inevitably, worst case scenario, you're sued, right? And let's say the planning comes across a judge's desk. What do we want him to see? Do we want him to say, wow, this was blatant creditor protection? This is, oh, he definitely transferred these assets because he didn't want to pay or hinder, or he didn't want to pay a creditor, right? We don't want that, right? We want to master the optics behind this. And what we want to say is, or what we want the judge to say and the other parties to see is that this planning was, while it had the effect of wealth preservation, that wasn't its purpose. There was another purpose on here, and that was, let's say, financial plan. Maybe the purpose of the plan was to do estate planning or tax planning or life planning in general, right? But what's the effect? The effect is asset protection, okay? So in sum, okay, what we want to do is protect your wealth. And of course, not to use the word in its own definition, but asset protection is exactly that. We're protecting your assets. So I guess the other question is why? You know, why do we need asset protection, right? Especially here in the United States. I mean, there is a litigation plague right now. And to put this in financial terms, there's a bull market for litigation right now, okay? I mean, you can get sued for everything. I mean, just do a Google search about the crazy, crazy lawsuits. And sometimes it's not almost the lawsuit that's crazy, it's the amount the jury awards the plaintiff in those suits. It can be shocking sometimes, and those are extreme cases, but nonetheless, it just sheds light on why protecting your wealth is very important. If you're a business owner, for example, statistically, you're going to get sued. It's not a matter of really, it's a matter of when it's going to happen, in other words, okay, not if it's going to happen. And of course, if you're a wealthy individual, in other words, the affluent among us, I mean, you're a natural target for litigation because when you get sued, okay, it's not about justice, okay? This is nothing to do with justice. It's about how much money can the attorney who's suing you take from you and give to his client. Because these attorneys, especially the personal injury attorneys and the ones who take clients on contingency, right? What? They're going to try to take almost up to 40% of whatever they can get from you, which is a substantial amount. And part of what asset protection does is to frustrate their analysis of the case, right? Because the attorneys want to make money, the clients want to make money. But if the amount of hours spent, right, on the case, let's say they send you the demand letter, they sue you, they litigate the case, and then they get the judgment, okay, and then they have to collect the judgment. As far as the economic analysis and to a certain extent the psychology of asset protection goes, are the amount of hours worth it to justify the recovery? And even if there is a recovery, are they going to be able to collect on a lawsuit? So what asset protection does is, well, it might not prevent you from getting sued, but what it will do is frustrate that economic analysis that an attorney takes on the case so that it wouldn't be worth it to go after you because it would just be insurmountable in some cases to get over those assets. So I always ask my clients, okay, do you really think you're going to go your whole life without getting sued? Your whole life without getting sued? Maybe, okay, but maybe not. And then if you are sued, okay, do you think you're going to be treated fairly in a lawsuit? Okay, I mean, there's like planning. As they say, if the hurricane's around the corner, just coming off the coast of Cuba, it's probably going to be difficult to get hurricane insurance on your house. If it's on fire, you're probably not going to get fire insurance, right? So with asset protection to work best, you need to engage in preventative type planning. Okay.
Right. This is part of the reason a lot of the themes that I've talked about, I just want to interject because I see it coming forward. I wanted to make a point of mentioning it, of the interplay between what's going on and the fact that, don't get a sense of all these things are on you. We're here to elevate your understanding so that you know when to come to us. You know when to seek out the help when you need it proactively. So don't let some of these worries that might be the initial seed of a problem that can grow manifest into that moment where, everyone knows what it feels like when it feels like they dumped a bucket of cold water on you once the proverbial stuff hits the fan, as they say, right? So just take that into account here and have your trusted advisors. We're here for you. That's why we make ourselves available. I always say it and talk these worries out, because these are the things that you could do proactively, right? But yeah, sorry, Ryan, you could finish.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Why? And just to echo what you said, JP, you need to surround yourself with a good team of advisors, your wealth manager, your CPA, your attorneys, because they can be invaluable to you, help guiding you and protecting your financial wealth. Okay? Because at the end of the day, what is your greatest asset? Think about it. What is your greatest asset? Some people say, it's my money. It's my business empire, right? It's my royalties. It's my intellectual property rights. But is it really? Think about it. What is your greatest and most important asset? It's your children. It's your children. We are a family society here, okay? And when we do good in life, the goal is not just to waste our wealth and dissipate it on frivolous entertainment. We're not getting, perhaps under a Bernie Sanders administration, but that's neither here nor there. The main thing is that when we get wealth, right, the goal is to eventually give it to our heirs, is to pass it on to our children, right? Not to spend it recklessly, right? Which is why it's so important to work with your advisors. Let's say you're a tax planner to make sure that it's efficient, there's tax efficiency there. You work with your financial advisors and managers so they can help you manage and they can grow your wealth. You work, let's say, with an estate planner to ensure that there's an orderly transition of wealth, let's say, from one generation to the next generation. The asset protection angle is to make sure, and our focus is to make sure that wealth stays with you, okay? Stays within the family. And of course, stays with you is a relative word because, as Rockefeller said, you want to own nothing, control everything, right? What's the difference, really? And if you don't own it, it can't be taken away from you, okay? In the most simplistic terms possible.
Right.
Of course, there's exceptions, right? But I tell my clients that, you need to think about your children. And if you don't have children, your heirs and those who you would, on your passing, who do you want to share your wealth with, right? So asset protection can help and be an amazing complement to your financial planning and your wealth planning, which is key.
Exactly. And I think we have a great question here. I think ties into what we're talking about because we mentioned some of these different components. Katerina has asked, would it be prudent to work in conjunction with a trust lawyer and an asset protection lawyer to cover your bases? If so, which I believe the answer would be yes, what steps should be taken and in which order is best to be advised? So I'll answer very quickly, and then I'll have Ron cover the asset protection side of this, and he has some expertise in both of these areas. So some of these things is exactly what you would rely on a wealth manager like myself to help quarterback for you, right? So there is tiers of estate planning. There's tiers of asset protection. And depending on your specific situation, whether things like what your assets, how they're distributed, whether you're a business owner or not, whether your job carries inherent risks of potentially being sued, all of these different things is going to impact to what degree you would need maybe asset protection, to what degree you would need estate planning. So when I'm looking at something from a 30,000 foot view, the way that it works is you don't have to worry about these types of things because these are extremely valid questions. But that is the questions that I'm going to bring up and help you, given I was your wealth manager. So I have your goals in mind. I know that maybe we've had several conversations, as an example, where, let's say, philanthropy, the inheritance for your next generation, and, your lifestyle and retirement are your key components, right? So anytime there's a life event, so, things like somebody passes or before so, or there's a new business gets started or assets start getting accumulated. Those are all, things that make my mind go ding, 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 ding. Someone like Ron needs to be contacted because there's asset protection implications in what's going on here. That's the importance of not just working with quality professionals, but going to your quarterly review. A lot of people avoid those things, and I understand, especially if you're dealing with someone who it's just a matter of ticking off a preset form for their legal purposes. No, it's about having a conversation about this is what's going on in my life. These are the things that are worrying me right now. These are the things that I have in my mind. And all those get translated into tiered approaches over time in these different areas. And as it becomes appropriate, you start engaging in someone to help protect your assets as assets grow. Someone to help, one of the first things people think of estate planning, for example, is when you have now a child, right? You start worrying about certain things like the implications of a guardian for them, and maybe your first will, and as you start gaining assets, you might start thinking in the trust areas. All these different things. There's expertise there, and there's tiers to your life, right? So the answer to this question is in my opinion, set things up and find sophisticated people you could work with, sophisticated wealth management, so you don't have to be asking yourself these questions because they're puzzling and it takes a long time and a sophisticated network to address them. And then I would love Ron to comment on this part because I know you know a bit. I'll repeat it for you. Work in conjunction with a trust. So she's saying an estate attorney and an asset protection attorney to cover your bases. Talking about that.
Sure, and thank you for the question. Estate planning and asset protection, they're not mutually exclusive, right? One is going to complement the other. And as we approach the topic, right, is a lot of times, depending on timing, of course, and depending on the specific facts of your situation, what you want to do is not the asset protection, but the estate plan. But what's the effect? Asset protection. Because remember, it's about doing this in a way that judges and juries are going to respect, so that the effect secondary to your main financial plan or estate plan would be to protect your wealth, but that's not its purpose. Although a lot of times between the client and I, we know what we're doing. Okay. And as far as there's a lot of competent estate planners out there that advise on asset protection, and I'm of the opinion that if your estate planning attorney isn't advising you on asset protection, then there could be issues there, certain malpractice issues. Because one thing is to, as I mentioned before, provide for the orderly disposition of your assets on your death, right? But it's another thing to make sure that by the time that you die, you still have assets within your estate. And that's where an asset protection attorney can really help. A lot of times working in conjunction with the estate planner, okay? Almost as an advisor. But it really just depends on the facts. For example, I've worked with estate planning attorneys where they come up with the structure, right? But there could be issues with, well, how are we going to transfer those assets into the structure? Because remember, as I alluded to previously, there's the biggest weapon against asset protection is the law of fraudulent transfers, okay? Which means that you can't do anything in derogation of the rights of a creditor. So in English, that means that if I sue you, okay, and I know you've got $1 million, but then you just give the $1 million to your brother, you can't just say, sorry, I have no more money. If that were the case, there would be no remedy, right? It would be pointless to sue people. So under the law of fraudulent transfers, okay, or as it's now called, voidable transfers, okay, I would be able to ask a judge to say, well, nice try, but you have to give it back. You know, your brother, you know, you got to give it, that person has to give it back to you, okay? Or worse, I can just go directly after the person you transferred it to. So I'm brought in, okay, a lot of times to advise on how to properly transfer it into the structure, because arguably, again, depending on timing, depending on facts, it's not so much the resulting structure that's important. I mean, you can a lot of times just go to Google, and Google will give you a plethora of structures from which to choose from, right? It's about the transfer into the structure and whether a judge will be able to unwind that transfer, okay? And of course, it depends on the amount of the wealth, right? Are you above the estate tax exemption or not? Do you have the assets, let's say, to warrant a fully funded trust, or perhaps a revocable trust would be a better suited, okay? Or we could see that with estate planners, you know, revocable trusts are great. I mean, you avoid probate, okay? But they're revocable. A judge can say, revoke the trust, and the assets revert back to you, and then there's zero asset protection, okay? So a lot of times it's working in conjunction with estate planners, okay? And, you know, asset protection, it seems almost have this exotic appeal to it where, yeah, we want to go offshore, or, you know, we want to create these complex structures, but a lot of times it isn't. We do asset protection all the time. Insurance. With insurance is great, it's cheap. Okay, and that's usually like the first line of defense is insurance. I mean, what are we telling the attorney's going to sue us? They're richer than us. Just go after them. So we're actually taking, when we have insurance, that we're shifting the liability to pay, quote unquote, to the insurance company. And that's where the attorneys are going to go. So is that asset protection? Well, yeah. A lot of people operate under limited liability companies. They don't even know it, but those are great asset protection tools. Why? Because they limit your liability, okay? So people do asset protection every day in their lives without even realizing it, okay? And as far as when to get an asset protection attorney involved, okay, it would depend on the particular facts of your situation and the amount of wealth, whether you're sued or not. Is this proactive type asset protection, or is this preventative type asset protection, okay? But my point here is that it's something that you need to think about. Don't just think about the estate plan. Think about, well, how to protect my assets that go into the state so that on my passing, they're there for my children or for my heirs, okay? And I want to mention one thing that JP said. He said he was the quarterback, right? Both managers are excellent at quarterbacking these cases, and you really need to seek them out and consult with them so they can identify certain issues and say, well, you know what? I think you need to speak to an estate planner or an asset protection attorney or both, okay? JP used quarterbacks. I a lot of times call them, you know, they're like the composer in a symphony. They're directing everything. They say, oh, come over here for the asset protection, go over there for the estate planning here. Or it's, my point is that it has to be a collaborative effort. Okay, so to answer your question, without rambling on too much, they're not mutually exclusive. and there's a spot for all of it. But what I want you to get from this is to think that asset protection is something that deserves your time. Think about it, okay? And then regarding
Absolutely.
regarding the what I mentioned before about the protection, okay? Excuse me. We want to do it in a way that it's respected, okay? Because it goes back to that fraudulent transfer issue, okay? Your intent. Why did you do that transfer? Was it estate planning? Maybe, or maybe not. So working in conjunction with an estate planning attorney, okay, both, we can make it so that there's not just asset protection, but also effective estate planning. And that's why I'm a big believer in the approach that JP had talked about in the beginning and throughout this presentation or this conversation, right? Is that you need to combine your asset protection, your wealth preservation with your estate planning, your tax planning, and your financial planning. And you can't just go to Google, right, and look up the structure. My clients come to me and they say, well, what if I did this? I had a client the other day. He wanted to transfer a large part. He's going to get sued, and he wanted to transfer a large part of his wealth to his children. Estate planning, right? And I just said, do you really want to involve your child in your problems? Really? Because when it comes to the psychology of asset protection, right, we have to know a substantial amount of the law regarding collections, right? And the remedies for creditors, of course, one being fraudulent transfer. So you might have an indestructible, bulletproof plan, right? Okay, and let's just assume they can't get your assets, but they can make your life difficult, right? And it's as one commentator said to me one time, and stuck with me, is that it's about, when it comes time to collection, it's about pressure points, right? So maybe they know they can't get the assets or they're safe, but, well, maybe if you transferred assets to one of your child, they can bring your child in the lawsuit. And that changes the game radically, okay? So you have to get into the psychology of it as far as how are we going to upset the attorney's economic analysis of the case, right? And how are we going to relieve ourselves of many pressure points as possible, okay? So it's a lot on the transfers of the assets.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And honestly, that was a great question. And to me, it speaks to also the importance of, I really hope you guys could appreciate, because it's respectively very intentional, the way that Ron has set up his situation and his firm, and the way that our firm is set up. And I always talk about independent firms, right? And there's a certain quality and a checks and balances that comes with a seamless team, but of independent firms, okay? They all have respectively responsibilities to you. Okay, and then when they're working on a team, there's checks and balances here that even come out not just in your best interest in minimizing conflicts. We've seen some of the massive fines being handed out to these when we cover the news in some of our previous streams. We've seen massive fines, massive violations happening at these large firms that are highly conflicted. When you have a setup like this, not only is there checks and balances, but you can have a situation where asset protection works with an estate planner. And then if there's an issue, it's very difficult, going off what Ron was saying, it's very difficult to say you did this just to protect your assets. Well, there was even an estate planning attorney involved, because this has to do with estate planning ramifications and is part of my estate plan. Not just that, this all fits into a larger wealth plan that I've been building and maintaining for how long now? And that changes the game, not only in just quality, but there's synergies here, even in what somebody like Ron is able to do in a framework like that, right? And you don't have to sacrifice the convenience, because professionals can work together. Where specialists are meant to be part, which him and I are. Specialists are meant to be part of a team. A specialist can't do think of it as a highly specialized surgeon. There's many people that go into a given surgery aside from even the surgeon, who even if they're the key player, what have you, there's many people that come into play here. There's many specialists. And by nature, specialists play well together. They're supposed to be part of these cohesive teams. And I hope you guys start seeing the difference in approach, the difference in, frankly, quality, sophistication when you deal with high expertise, independent specialists, and then how they come together as part of a wealth plan. And then nobody likes going to, also you were saying, clients love, getting a feel for things in their search for professionals, right? So, not only in their search for professionals, have you guys gone and looked for professionals? It's quite daunting. People are everywhere. It's very hard for you with low expertise in the area to sort of sift through. People will come to you with all sorts of attractive structures, as Ron would say. Oh, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do the other. But there's a bunch of other things that come into play, just like how it was executed, that's going to determine your success. And there's nuances like that are going to be very difficult for you to figure out through some Google searching and a little bit of Google research. So, minimize conflicts. You're already going to do a lot for yourself there in these areas that I'm telling you. Seek out high expertise and people who are willing to work together. You start creating systems where, once you've done your due diligence, you've learned a bit, you're setting up systems to best serve you, right? Low conflicted, independent, all these sorts of things. So I know there are things that I've been repeating. The reason I take opportunities like this to piggyback off conversations is those of you who've been here from the start of our streams, I've repeated these themes over and over and over. And as we go on, and we're going to have more conversations with Ron and others in, areas like tax and possibly estate, you're going to see the things that I've been alluding to in real life examples. And I urge you guys to start understanding what that means for you in your life and implement these things for your own benefit. We actually have another question here. Let's check it out. Sal is asking, so if I'm following you, if I have it set up beforehand, it makes it much harder for them to involve your kids, or are they always going to be at risk if they're involved in your estate planning?
Sure. Thanks, Sal, for the question. I guess, it would largely depend on how it's set up and how far in advance it is set up, because there's laws that claw back certain transfer going back years, right? So you would have to look at the documents and the circumstances upon which the transfer, but generally speaking, okay? And of course, there's no one size fits all structure. They're factual, they're heavy on facts, right? If it was set up in advance, okay, and there was no creditors to worry about, then you're probably fine. And your typical estate planning, let's say irrevocable trust, by its very nature is going to have the effect of protecting your assets, right? And of course, for tax purposes, for estate planning purposes, of course, you can gift assets to your children, okay? But the only thing that I'm saying is that when you do so, and before you start making transfers and doing that, make sure you're well advised, okay? Make sure it works well with your wealth plan. Make sure from a tax perspective, it's clean, okay? And then, of course, from the estate planning and asset protection perspective, make sure that it's going to work, right? Make sure that it's going to withstand judicial scrutiny, right? For that worst case scenario, okay? Because the asset protection could be the linchpin of the entire plan, right? But to answer your question directly, it sounds like you would be fine, right? But like I said, it's a heavy stack specific scenario to see whether they can go after your children or not, but probably not, right? And it's usually settles before that, depending on the claim, okay? Depending on who your creditor is. Is it the IRS, the SEC, an ex-spouse? Is it just your typical business divorce? So a lot of times we look at the creditors. Who are your creditors, right? Are you going to be, as a result of this structure, are you now insolvent? Are you still paying your debts? Okay, so these are all elements that we have to look for in the plan, okay? And we advise our clients accordingly on that. So as JP was saying, you need to reach out to your advisors on this, and create that team, okay? before, let's say, there's just transfers happening, and we want to make sure everything flows nicely and that it's cohesive and integrated. And then, of course, depending on the issues, we involve what are certain innovative and creative strategies alongside your other advisors to protect your wealth.
Absolutely. And yeah, again, that I say it over and over again. That's why I started the stream to begin with. And now it's growing and it's going to extend into some other mediums and other platforms as well, thankfully. And we're expanding into talking about these issues that I've been alluding to more in real time with real examples, and opening it up to you guys as well, right, for your benefit. But we're here for you guys. That's why we're here. I'm going to put up the contact information. We're going to be wrapping up shortly. So just as an FYI, any last questions, squeeze them in before we have to wrap up. But it's the reason we make ourselves available. Personally, especially now streaming to Facebook friends, and our extended business networks, et cetera, clients and friends, please don't be shy. Reach out to us. Our contact information will be there. We're here to be used as a resource. We're here to help individuals. We're very proud, independent professionals. So, rely on us. Take advantage of that. Absolutely. And I had one last question. I was hoping it was kind of the funner ones to give us one of these. I know we've talked about a lot of them, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here, Ron, but some of these, maybe a high net worth example of some of these horror stories where someone tried doing something and maybe in the name of asset protection, but it didn't quite work out, or where someone just didn't do it and things went, pretty badly, just to emphasize the importance of these sorts of things.
I think one of the most famous cases within the asset protection community is that, without getting into too many facts, is that this individual had about $6 million, okay? And he was sued, of course. Everything was in his own name, okay? So he spoke to an estate planning attorney, okay, who I believed dabbled in asset protection. And he was advised to transfer $6 million to his wife, who in the American Bar Association article about the case was what they called a pinup wife, right? So as you would expect, 3 months after the last transfer went through, he was served with the divorce papers. And she was going to move on, okay? And the transfer, of course, happened by working with a family law attorney, okay, on an antenuptial agreement, or a postnuptial agreement, excuse me, right? So the assets become that of the wife's. So in court, he went to the judge, pleading with him, and just said, Your Honor, I really just did this to protect my assets. Okay, strike number, let's fail number one. You never want to say that you're doing it for protecting your assets, and that I need you to rescind the postnuptial agreement because it was fake. I didn't really want to give everything to her. The judge looked at the agreement and said, well, this looks real to me. I'm sorry. And the last that was in the article was that he was penniless, living with his mother. Okay? So that is a major fail, right? Right. And it's not to say that transferring assets to your spouse is not a good option. That's an amazing option. Sometimes we just transfer it to the marriage, right? But it depends about the facts, right? And what facts are we looking at? And I see a lot with this reckless transfer between children and spouses, where you transfer it to your LLC, for example, thinking that it's going to be safe, but it's not going to be, okay? So you really have to look into that. And, a lot of clients come to me and they come to me with these grand scenarios and these what ifs, right? And I think, if I may, just from my memory, what I've seen is that, they might have a trust, right? Thinking they have asset protection, okay? It's for the benefit of their heirs, but it's revocable, okay? The judge just says, revoke it. Assets are yours. No asset protection. Or perhaps it's an irrevocable trust, okay? But you maintain too much control, right? And you have a benefit from those assets. You're enjoying those assets, right? So was it really a transfer? No. So in that case, it's not going to work. And that big thing I see is that people just put their assets in an LLC and they think that that's going to protect them. Remember, limited liability companies are great, but they're just pieces of paper filed with the division of corporations that impute illegal fiction onto the entity. It's like a person, right? But they don't have a brain. There's no arms. There's no legs, right? And I see this in the real estate context a lot, where they put their they put their property into the LLC thinking it's going to protect them. But how is an LLC going to collect rent? How is an LLC going to fix the water heater or the oven? And let's, God forbid, that something explodes, right? And that the tenant gets hurt. Who do you think they're going to sue? Well, obviously the LLC, right? Because that's the owner of the property. But remember, LLCs they can't fix things, right? They're fake, okay, in that sense. So there's always going to be a human being behind it. And the question with asset protection is, well, how are we going to protect that human being, which is you, okay? And speaking on the LLC context, okay, people spend way too much time thinking about how they can limit their liability and separate themselves from their business operations. In other words, they don't want to be liable personally for the debts and obligations of their business, right? But I find that a lot of people spend no time whatsoever thinking about how they're going to protect the business from them, okay? Because if you get sued personally, and you're not just going to cut a check over to the plaintiff, in other words, the person who wins that lawsuit, they're going to say, well, what assets do you have? Wow, you've got this empire or conglomerate of companies all owned by you. So they can seek to attach, if you have a corporation as stock, okay, if you have an LLC, if it's a single member LLC, both your economic and governance rights in it, and then ask the judge to assign it to you. And if that happens, then you're no longer the owner of your company, okay? So you got to think about liabilities from the inside and from the outside. And then I think I'll conclude with this.
Yeah.
LLCs versus corporations, okay? Corporations are malpractice, okay? Corporations are bad. Do not get corporations, okay? If you're a professional advisor, that's a different story, okay? But if you're not, operating from a corporation from the outside in provides you with zero protection. And it's all too often, I see clients that have Incs, okay, and Corps. And I say, well, why? And I said, well, my accountant recommended that, because we wanted to take the subchapter S election, okay? We want to be taxed as a C Corp, okay? I said, well, that's great because you could do that with an LLC, but you know that corporate stock, okay, can be attached. And that means that they can essentially, if you own a corporation, the shares in that corporation comprise of voting rights. And under doctrines of free transferability, your creditor can get a hold of those shares. With an LLC, they can't because of charging order protection, but that would be a speech for another day, another topic. But LLCs are the entity. So I guess with that,
we had one last question snuck in on a watch party. They don't get aggregated on my main feed here, so I have to look for these. But someone was asking within the context of asset protection, should the average person have an umbrella liability policy?
Yeah, I hope you're having fun at your watch party. I have to look that up. But as far as the insurance question, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's like free asset protection, right? I mean, again, You're shifting the burden, the liability to pay that to someone else. And who's the attorney going to go after? The deep pockets. And those are the insurance companies. So You should absolutely 100% have your, let's say, commercial liability policy. But if you've ever looked at these policies, you've got one page of what's covered and then 20 pages of what's not covered, usually 2 or 4 bars in very tiny fine print, literally fine print, right? And, a lot of it doesn't cover you for intentional acts or negligence. So you really got to look at the policy, right? So for whatever's not covered, then you get the umbrella policy. And they're really, really, really cheap. And it's just an added layer of protection. And if I may, JP, as we had spoke briefly about yesterday, think of it about as an asset protection pyramid or continuum, right? It's like, all right, what are we going to start off with? Well, insurance, of course, right? Cheap, It's it's asset protection right there, okay? But it's always not enough, right? Asset protection is like your net worth insurance. Insurance for your net worth, right? While just your standard insurance, well, we all know what standard insurance is, right? And then, okay, after my insurance, then what is there? Well, homestead, if you live in Florida, completely protected, right? Full amount, depending on where you live, of course. And then after the homestead, well, let's look at our statutory exemptions, annuities, life insurance, maybe titling assets in the name of the marriage, which is tenancy by the entirety, which is great planning. And Florida allows you to title assets that way, not just real property, but personal assets, which is great. And then we move along the continuum, and it's like, okay, after statutory exemptions, let's look at now our investment type entities. Let's look at LLCs, right? And perhaps revocable trusts that we can incorporate into that for added protection. And then after that, we get into the irrevocable trusts. And then after that, you can go offshore, okay? And going offshore, which is outside the scope of this presentation, but it's great if it's justified, of course, because you're essentially taking the assets outside of the jurisdiction of U.S. judges and juries, right? But only if it's done right. So I'll conclude and just state that you need to be properly advised and have your team, because you can look these structures up, right?
Yeah.
It's not so much about the structure, it's about the transfer into the structure. And with competent advisors, you can certainly affect a great preservation and protection of your wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great point to end off on, and to tie it back together to what we do. Ron's a professional who has a holistic view, right? And my job as wealth manager, like I'm always saying, is that 30,000 foot view. So when you work on things in isolation, things are missed. And what do you go to professionals and a wealth manager who's going to deploy different people? What do you see someone like Ron for? It in the end of the day, it's for security and that feeling that comes with, hey, no matter what happens to me, anything could happen tomorrow. Somebody that sees me as a target and tries to take advantage of me, all of those things could happen, but I'm going to be safe and I'm going to sleep like a baby because of it, right? And what I would say is just take what we're talking about here to heart, because sometimes people arrive at that feeling by working on things in isolation. But like we're talking about the umbrella policy, when you're taking the 30,000 foot view, it's going to be part of the plan that you might have an umbrella policy. You might be already doing different things in different areas. We'll take into account things like your home is protected. Whereas if you just work on something in isolation and someone quickly assesses your scenario, not only could things be done wrong, so you perceive that you might be protected and safe or have a holistic plan, but really things aren't going to be working as you thought they were. Or there could be overlap, and that inefficiency could lead to the same thing we're trying to avoid, which is eroding the value of your assets. We don't want that, right? Because we want it to be maintained. We want it to be there for your children. We want it. That's what's good. That's what you're seeking. That positive force in your life where not just, hey, I've done all these different things. Oh yeah, I got an estate guy. I got someone I talked to about asset protection. I have someone working on the portfolio. Where no, it's a cohesive plan with synergy where people are on the same page and they're sophisticated. So that's the type of conversations we have here. That's the type of teams that Ronald and I are trying to be part of always. That's the main goal, because we know at the end result, that's where clients win. So in the spirit of elevating your knowledge and wealth management, take these lessons that we're showing you guys, reach out. We're here for you. As we wrap up here, I'm going to put our contact information on the screen, both mine and Ron's. Don't be shy. Please, we're here for you guys. Again, take advantage. I'd like to sincerely thank you guys for being here. Again, this is Ron, shareholder of Iaconi Law, and I'm JP, as you guys know me, some of you, Jean-Paul, co-founder of Rushlight Investments. I'm a wealth manager, private wealth manager. We're going to keep having these streams over time. It's eventually going to evolve into a larger panel discussion where we'll tackle topics from simultaneously from the asset protection side, from the wealth management side, from the portfolio side with my partner Gaston, from the tax side with CPAs in different areas, right? All these different things will start giving you that enhanced knowledge and make you a better consumer, so you could align yourself with people like we're describing here. And that's ultimately going to optimize your chances of success. Going to, yes, give you that feeling that you're doing great, but not just the feeling, the real great products, the real great system behind it, and cohesive from the 30,000 foot view. So with that being said, here I'm going to throw up the screen for you guys. Our contact information is there.